I went to dinner with my children at the restaurant and saw my wife and her lover together. I told my children, "Kids, get in the car, we're leaving soon," and when they went to the car, I went to her table with her lover and said, "I came here to have dinner with our children and I see this terrifying scene. You just destroyed our family. I hope you're happy with your choice, I'm leaving." She stood up as if she had been slapped in the soul, with her eyes wide open, as if reality had crashed down on her head, but it was too late. Something inside me, which until then insisted on surviving for her, for us, for the years and dinners and laughter and Sundays at home, died there. I didn't leave out of pride. I left because I finally understood that there was nothing left to save. Not even her silence. Not even the trembling in her hands as she looked at me, without the courage to say a single word. She ran after me, stumbling over the words that wouldn't come, over the pleas for forgiveness that seemed empty compared to what I saw with my own eyes. I was already gone long before I turned my back. And the cruelest thing, she knew it at that moment. She cheated on me while I was still protecting her from the world, from problems, from judgments. She cheated on me while I was making plans, while I was looking for a special wine for our anniversary, while I was teaching our children to love her. She cheated on me with a man with no past, no history, who smiled at my side at family parties as if he wasn't sleeping with the woman I called his wife. And she smiled back. The worst part wasn't finding out. The worst part was realizing that, perhaps, at some point, she had been with me out of pity, out of convenience, out of fear of being alone. I was blind and deaf, trying to save a marriage that had died inside her a long time ago. But she didn't have the courage to tell me. She needed me to see with my own eyes what she didn't have the decency to confess. The nights when she came home late from work now felt like a lie. The long showers, the archived messages, the cell phone face down. Everything made sense now. Every, "I love you," she murmured in a rehearsed way. Every time she pretended to care, while inside her something was already far away, living another life. And I, ridiculous, thought everything was getting better. That we were being reborn. I wondered how I hadn't noticed before, how I could have been so stupid, so blind, so willing to believe in something that only existed in my head. She slept next to me and dreamed of someone else. She made love to me with her body absent, as if fulfilling a contract. The same body that, now I know, truly gave itself when it wasn't with me. She had it all. My love, my loyalty, my trust, my fears confessed in the middle of the night, my mistakes forgiven, my entire family handed to her on a silver platter, my children calling for her as she undressed for another man. She threw it all away for a moment. For someone who made her feel alive, perhaps, but who never had to pay the bill for real life by her side. The lover was easy, light, without obligations. He didn't see her give birth, nor did he take care of her when she was sick, nor did he support her when her parents died. I saw all of that. I was there. I was a presence and a pillar. And she traded it all for a fantasy. And yet, she ran after me. She shouted my name in the parking lot. She said it wasn't what I thought. And I laughed. Laughing was the only thing I could do when I saw her panicked face. Because it was, yes, exactly what I was thinking. And much more. Because it wasn't just the sexual betrayal. It was the contempt. It was the theater she had been putting on for months, maybe years. And at that moment, she realized that I was the only one who truly loved her. Who wanted her whole, even with her crises and silences. Who was willing to grow old by her side. But it was too late. She saw me leave. And deep down, she knew it was final. What she didn't know, and would soon discover, was that her lover never planned to stay. He was the kind of man who liked the game, the conquest, the adrenaline of the forbidden. And as soon as he saw her alone, stripped of her role as wife, mother, woman desired by another, he left. It was that simple. He disappeared without explanation. And then, she found herself alone, empty, rejected. And for the first time she tasted what she herself had served me. The difference is that I survived. She didn't. Because I rebuilt my pieces, no matter how painful it was. I found shelter in the love of my children, in simple days, in sincere friendships. One day, a new woman appeared. Not to heal my pain, but to walk by my side when I no longer needed to be saved. She tried to come back. She sent letters, messages, left flowers on the doorstep. She said she was sorry, that she had been weak, that the other man had abandoned her like some trash. But none of that mattered anymore. Because it's not about forgiving a fall. It's about understanding that when someone steps on you so coldly, what dies is not just love. It's admiration. And without that, nothing survives. Sometimes I still remember that night. The look on my children's faces, confused, when I told them to get in the car. My voice was firm while my heart was bleeding. The table where they were sitting, both of them laughing like teenagers, thinking the world would not touch them. I remember her running after me, and the exact moment I turned my face away. That was the sentence. That was the end of what was left between us. But what struck me the most was not what I saw that night. It was what I discovered later. One last truth that she hid, and that changed everything. Because she thought she had lost her husband. But what she really lost, was much more than that. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize or support any type of betrayal. All the stories are fictional, but each one carries a truth. Betrayal destroys lives, families, and souls. Our goal is to show, through the character's pain, the real weight of wrong choices. Get ready, what you are about to hear is a shocking, intense, and unforgettable story. Good story. Daniel was the kind of man who didn't draw attention when he entered a place, but it was enough to exchange a few words with him for his presence to become impossible to ignore. He had a calm way of listening, a firm yet welcoming voice, as if he knew the weight of words and chose them responsibly. At 42 years old, his face bore the soft marks of maturity and his eyes bore the clarity of someone who had faced a lot and yet remained kind. He was a civil engineer, the kind of man who liked to see structures being built from scratch, as if each building were a reflection of what he believed in life. Everything can be built with dedication, effort, and faith. He was methodical, a homebody, and loved family Sundays, watching movies with his children again and having coffee made at the right time, just like his father used to do. Despite the challenges, his life always followed a predictable path, with solid values and clear priorities. And among all these priorities, there was always Laura. Laura, on the other hand, was intense. She was 39 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes that sometimes made younger women envious. A literature teacher at a renowned school, she was passionate about words, details, and subtext. She had a poetic outlook on life and a way of transforming any situation into something symbolic, as if everything were part of a larger narrative. She met Daniel while still in college, during a seminar on contemporary languages and urban planning. He, with his logical reasoning and practical vision, she, with her abstract ideas and passionate theories. They fell in love quickly. The differences between them, instead of driving them apart, brought them together. Laura said that Daniel was her ground, and he said that she was his window to the world. They had 2 children, Lucas, 12, a creative and curious boy, and Isabella, 8, sweet and observant. The house they lived in had been designed by Daniel and decorated by Laura, a reflection of the fusion of 2 worlds, concrete and poetry. At first, their married life seemed like a movie that worked out well. As the years went by, challenges came as they do for any couple: bills, fatigue, work stress, inconsistent schedules, silent doubts that arise during sleepless nights. But there was something between them that always brought them back to the center, a kind of invisible pact that, even in the face of turbulence, they would continue rowing together. Daniel was proud of the stability he had built. He worked more than he would have liked, it's true, but he justified it by saying that he did everything for the children, for their comfort, for their future. Laura, although she missed more time together, didn't complain. She admired his dedication, his ethics, his commitment to family. And, even though she sometimes felt alone, all it took was a loving gesture from Daniel, an improvised dinner, a note on the coffee table, for everything to calm down inside her again. In everyone's eyes, they were the ideal couple. They were the ones who organized Sunday barbecues, who were always together at school reunions, who took smiling photos on every vacation trip. But behind the curtains of their carefully arranged home, there were silent gaps that grew over time. Daniel spent more time away from home. Not out of disinterest, but because he felt he needed to secure everything: the best school, the health plan, the renovation of the beach house. Laura, on the other hand, was beginning to feel invisible. She didn't need luxury. She needed presence. She needed to be seen, heard, touched with the same delicacy she used when teaching her students about Shakespeare's tragedies and Jane Austen's impossible loves. Routine took over the space that was once filled with notes and long kisses. Now the hugs were quick, the conversations functional, the glances hurried. There was still love, but it was hidden in layers of commitments, deadlines, and silences. Even so, Laura kept trying to rekindle the flames. She planned dinners, came up with little surprises, and sent romantic messages during work hours. And Daniel, although almost always busy, tried to reciprocate. But the truth is that, without realizing it, they were already living in parallel worlds. He thought he was proving his love with effort, dedication, and responsibility. She, in turn, was hoping for something more emotional, more intimate, more spontaneous. This disconnection was not obvious. It was subtle, like a crack in a solid wall. It goes unnoticed for a long time, until the moment when it is too big to ignore. The children's school was the constant link that kept them in sync. They shared the parenting tasks with zeal. Daniel was the father who never missed a presentation. Laura was the mother who made a point of reading every note in the diary. The children grew up surrounded by love. But even the children, in their innocent wisdom, began to notice that something had changed. Lucas, more sensitive, asked questions that were too specific for a boy his age. Isabella, although more reserved, drew pictures where her mother appeared alone, looking to the side, while her father appeared driving or with the phone in his hand. Small things, but they revealed that the emotional absence had already seeped into the floor of the house. Her close friends commented on how Laura had become more introspective. She no longer told as many stories, and she no longer laughed with the same enthusiasm. Some of her closest friends asked if everything was okay. And she, always elegant, said yes, that it was just tiredness. That the life of a mother, teacher, and wife was demanding. But deep down, she missed being desired, being seen as a woman, not just as part of a functional structure. The school routine, the pedagogical meetings, the students' texts, everything began to seem more alive than her own home. Sometimes she would spend minutes looking out the living room window, watching couples walk by holding hands, and she would wonder when she had stopped being looked at like that. Daniel, even though he was aware of these nuances, didn't know how to act. He grew up in a family where feelings were demonstrated more through actions than words. He thought that providing was love. That being present for obligations was enough. He didn't understand that Laura needed something different. And, instead of trying to understand better, he immersed himself even more in work, as if that were the solution to any emptiness. He woke up early, arrived late, and sometimes forgot important dates. Not out of malice, but because he had too much to do. He still loved Laura, but he no longer knew how to reach her. It was as if there was a glass between them. He could see, but couldn't reach. Even so, there was beauty in the small gestures. When they managed to have dinner together, there were smiles. When their children lay down between them in bed on Sunday morning, there was laughter. When they looked at each other for more than 5 seconds, there was still tenderness. But there was also tiredness, distance, noise. And all of this accumulated like dust under the carpet, until the day when a spark could set everything on fire. The balance was fragile, although they did not know it. And, while Daniel continued to believe that he was building a secure future, Laura, silently, began to question whether that future was really what she wanted. The nights became longer for her. She spent more time reading than sleeping. She revisited old letters, photos from the beginning of their marriage, songs they had danced to together in the living room. She tried, in vain, to rediscover that feeling of fulfillment. And when he hugged her from behind, distracted, she closed her eyes and tried to believe that it was still enough. But time corrodes what is not nourished. And as much as there was affection, as much as there was still love, there was also a glaring absence of that which makes love alive, connection. And this, little by little, turns even the most solid of marriages into a sandcastle. No one betrays from one moment to the next. No one wakes up and decides to destroy an entire story. Before that, there are small choices. There are silences that hurt, there are gestures that are lost, there are desires that are swallowed. There are expectations that are not said, there are touches that do not happen. There is the loneliness of being accompanied. And it is in this space, in this void between what was dreamed and what is lived, that fragility finds gaps. And it was exactly in this space, in this deafening silence between two people who were once everything to each other, that something began to change. Something subtle, imperceptible, but that would soon become impossible to ignore. Laura began to lose herself in imperceptible details. In the way she took a long time to answer when Daniel called her from his room, in the way she spent more time fixing her hair before leaving for work, in the smiles she saved only for her cell phone when she thought no one was looking. There was no sudden change, it wasn't something that would make a pact obvious, but small habits accumulated like dead leaves in a garden that was once full of flowers. Laura was still present at home, she made the children's favorite food, corrected tests at the living room table, sat on the couch at night with a book in her hands. But her soul was already starting to inhabit other places. Daniel, too busy with a project that was falling behind schedule and the company's new budget that depended on a delicate bidding process, didn't notice the signs as he should have. He saw the body, heard the voice, received a quick kiss and thought that everything was still under control. But it wasn't. Laura's friends saw her differently. The sparkle in her eyes was not the same as before, but there was a new restlessness, a need to validate herself, to be noticed, desired, remembered as a woman. One of them even commented, between smiles, that she seemed more alive, more intense. Laura just smiled back, neither confirming nor denying. She was not the kind of woman who sought adventures, much less one who cheated on impulse. But inside her there was a need that had become unbearable. She was not looking for another man, she was looking for herself. The woman she once was, the one who danced for no reason, the one who felt beautiful when looked at with desire. The one who was not only a mother, a teacher and a devoted wife. And it was in this emotional vacuum, in this fertile ground of fragility and hunger for recognition, that someone appeared willing to say everything that Laura had stopped hearing for too long. His name was Thomas. Tall, elegant, the kind of man who smiled slowly, as if he knew the effect he was having. He was the father of a student at the school where Laura worked, a widower for 3 years, with the tired eyes of someone who had faced pain and survived, but also a firm presence that exuded confidence. Their conversations began innocently, in the hallways, after pedagogical meetings, between shy laughter about the topics of the essays. Laura didn't pay any attention at first, but Thomas began to show up with unusual frequency. He would personally take his son on days when he would previously have had school transportation, ask about books, ask for suggestions of authors to better understand his son's sensitivity. There was a care in his words, a way of looking her in the eyes that Daniel had forgotten. And Laura, even though she tried to ignore it, felt her blood heating up when they talked. She was ashamed of it. She would get home and avoid the mirror. She felt guilty when she lay down next to her husband, but also a tightness in her chest when she realized that he didn't notice her guilt. As if that didn't even matter anymore. The messages began a week later. A thank you for a reading recommendation. Then, a comment on a passage from the book. And, without Laura realizing it, the texts became more intimate. Thomas was careful, respectful, but persistent. He knew how to compliment her without sounding vulgar, how to make her feel special without crossing an obvious line. And that was how he got in. Without forcing the door. Just waiting for her to open it herself. And Laura did. At first hesitantly, then with restrained desire, until there was no way back. Their encounters began as quick coffees in the middle of the afternoon. Then, dinners out of town, in places where they wouldn't be seen. Laura dressed up meticulously, wearing clothes she hadn't worn in years, calmly applied her makeup, and chose the perfume that Daniel had used to compliment her on in the past. With Thomas, she felt noticed, heard, desired. And that was enough. They didn't talk about the future, they didn't make promises. It was as if they lived inside a bubble where time stood still. But time, outside, was running out. Daniel began to notice a few things. Not right away. But he noticed that Laura avoided looking him in the eye. That sometimes she smiled at her cell phone and then turned it face down. That she came home smelling of wine even on days when she said she had stayed up late grading tests. He didn't want to believe anything. His mind searched for excuses, justifications. He tried to convince himself that it was tiredness, overload, stress. But deep down, something was starting to move in his stomach. A feeling he didn't want to name. One day, he picked up her cell phone in the kitchen. There was no password, but there were no messages either. Everything was clean. Too organized. Too silent. And that silence started to scream. The children began to ask questions. Lucas noticed his father's absence during regular hours and commented that his mother was more distracted. Isabella said that her mother was prettier, but sadder. Daniel listened quietly. He tried to maintain the routine, protect his children, believe that it could all just be a phase. But there was a constant restlessness. His intuition began to suffocate. He began to observe her more closely. And the more I observed, the more distant she seemed. One day, he arrived home from work early, without warning. He found Laura on the phone, laughing softly, wearing a dress he hadn't seen in years. When she saw him, she was startled and hung up too quickly. She said she was a classmate. But Daniel knew that smile. It wasn't the one she used for her classmates. It was an intimate, private, complicit smile. He began to put the pieces together. The days she said she was too tired to talk, the different clothes, the perfume she hadn't worn in years, the way she would close herself off when he tried to hug her. Still, he didn't want to act on impulse. He decided to observe more. Until the night that would change everything arrived. It was Lucas's birthday. They decided to go out for dinner. A new, sophisticated restaurant, chosen by Laura. The four of them were fine. The night was peaceful. The children were laughing, Laura was especially radiant. And, for a moment, Daniel believed that everything was going back to normal. But as he called the waiter to bring his daughter's favorite dessert, a detail distracted him. Laura received a message and, when she read it, her face lost its glow. She tried to hide it, but Daniel saw it. Her expression was the same one he had seen years ago, when Lucas was born. A mixture of love and anxiety. It was emotion. But not for him. That night, Daniel said nothing. He took the children home, let Laura put Isabella to bed, pretended he didn't see Lucas trying to listen to their conversation in the kitchen. And he waited. When she came back into the living room, he asked if everything was okay. Laura said yes, but avoided his gaze. It was then that he looked at her and said, with unexpected firmness, that he knew. She froze. She tried to deny it. But her eyes said it all. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He just got up and went to his room. The next morning, he woke up early, made the children's breakfast, put their uniforms on the couch, left his wallet on the table, and left for work. Without a word. Laura didn't follow him. She didn't know what to say. In the days that followed, Daniel remained silent, but something had changed. The way he walked, the way he spoke, the way he avoided any contact. He was there, but he was no longer with her. The betrayal, now revealed, hovered between them like a ghost that could no longer be ignored. And while Laura faced the curious looks of her friends, the heavy silences of her children, and the definitive emotional absence of her husband, something bigger still hung in the air. A secret. Something that Laura thought would never come to light. But I was about to discover that sometimes the price of a wrong choice goes far beyond the loss of a love. It goes to a place where no apology can reach. Laura didn't see Daniel leave with the children that morning. She woke up to the sound of the door closing, still confused, not knowing if it had been a dream or reality. The room was empty, the pillows were cold, and the house had a strange, heavy silence, as if someone had removed the air from the rooms. She got up slowly, ran her hand through her hair, trying to organize not only her appearance, but also the thoughts that were jumbled up in her mind. She wanted to call Daniel, but she knew he wouldn't answer. She had tried in the previous days, without success. Since that night at the restaurant, he hadn't spoken to her. She felt like he was just waiting for the right moment to act, and what she feared most was what would happen when that moment arrived. For 3 weeks, Daniel's silence was her greatest punishment. He continued with his commitments, took care of the children, work, and the house, as if Laura were just a figure to be ignored, as if she had ceased to exist. But there was something different now, a clarity in his eyes that she had never seen before. It wasn't anger or pain. It was something deeper, the indifference of someone who had let go. And that hurt more than any scream. It was like being erased from life. Laura tried to get closer. She cooked his favorite meals, asked about his projects, sat next to him on the couch. But he remained unyielding, distant, focused on something she couldn't reach. Until, one Friday afternoon, he came home early from work, asked the children to go sleep at their grandmother's house and, with the calm that only someone who no longer expects anything can have, came into the living room and said he needed to talk. Laura froze. She felt a shiver run down her spine. His gaze was direct, firm, without any trace of emotion. He asked her to sit down. She obeyed. And then he began to speak. He said that, despite the pain, he had tried to understand. That somewhere along the way he had failed as a husband, that their marriage had been ailing for some time. But that none of that justified what she had done. He said that he did not hate her, but that he no longer felt love for her either. That, out of respect for the time they had spent together, he wanted a fair, peaceful, civilized separation. Laura tried to interrupt, but he gently raised his hand and said that there was no more discussion about the past. That the decision had been made. She asked if there was anyone, if he had already moved on with another woman, but he just smiled and said that those kinds of questions no longer mattered. In the following days, the divorce papers arrived. Laura cried every night, reviewing Thomas's messages, the hidden photos, the lies he had told. Thomas, in turn, no longer answered her calls. After she told him that her husband had found out everything, he disappeared as if nothing had happened. He left no notes, no explanations, no goodbyes. Laura found herself alone, abandoned, without a husband, without a lover, with 2 children who no longer looked at her the same way. The pain was unbearable, but she knew she deserved it. She tried to find refuge in classes, in books, in the school hallways, but everything seemed colorless. The weight of regret was a punishment greater than any judgment. What Laura didn't know yet was that Daniel had discovered more than just the betrayal. He had discovered what no husband expects to find, that the man his wife shared her body with was the same man who, years ago, had caused the greatest wound of his youth. Thomas was not just any stranger. They knew each other. They had been childhood friends. They grew up on the same street, shared secrets, toys, parties. Until the day when, at a crucial moment in their adolescence, Thomas destroyed everything out of ambition. When they were young, Daniel fell in love with the same girl Thomas wanted. And while Daniel invested in pure and sincere love, Thomas schemed behind his back, made up lies, sabotaged dates, undermined any possibility of his friend's happiness. It was a dark time, and the end of their friendship was inevitable. They never spoke again. Daniel moved on with his life, burying the past, rebuilding trust in people. And now, so many years later, that ghost from the past returned in the worst possible way, in his wife's bed. Daniel discovered this by chance, one day when he decided to look for the man who had destroyed his family. He typed his full name into a public records website. When he saw the smiling face on the screen, he froze. Time had not erased that cynical expression. It was him. The same one. The same smile. The same arrogant look. The same guy who stole to feel superior. And now, he was there again, infiltrating what was his, destroying with the same silent pleasure. It was at that moment that Daniel decided that it was not enough to just separate. He had to free himself once and for all. And to do that, he would have to look Laura in the eyes and tell her the truth. Not about what she already knew, but about what she still didn't know. The opportunity arose on a Saturday afternoon. The children were at Daniel's mother's house, and Laura was in the garden, trying to take care of the plants that she herself had left to dry out over the last few weeks. He went to her, and in a neutral tone, invited her to go for a walk. She hesitated, but accepted. They walked without touching each other, without looking at each other, just listening to the sound of their own footsteps. When they reached the park where they usually took their young children, he stopped, sat on a wooden bench and asked her to sit down too. The silence lasted for more than a minute, until he took a deep breath and began. She said she knew who Thomas was. She told him his full name, told him about the past, about the destroyed friendship, about the betrayal of their youth. Laura's eyes widened, she put her hand over her mouth, and she turned pale. He continued. He said that this wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a reopened wound. That she hadn't slept with a stranger. She had slept with the man who had once destroyed the boy he was. That she had given the enemy what was his. That, even without knowing it, she had become an accomplice to an old pain, much deeper than she could have imagined. Laura began to cry, saying she had no idea, that she didn't know who he was, that she had never heard that story. But Daniel was unmoved. He said he wasn't there to hear her justify herself, but to make her understand what she had done. He said it wasn't about forgiveness or hatred, but about conscience. That now she knew. That every touch, every kiss, every message she exchanged with Thomas was more than infidelity. It was a direct blow to the past that he had fought his entire life to overcome. She fell to her knees, trembling, begging him not to leave her, that all of this could not be final. But he just stood up, looked into her eyes with devastating calm, and told her that she was no longer part of the story he wanted to write from that moment on. He returned home alone. And when he closed the door behind him, he understood that this was the beginning of his freedom. She, in turn, remained there, kneeling, surrounded by memories that she could no longer touch, crying for a past that she could never fix and for a future that she could never reach. In the days that followed, Laura sank into a deep void. The weight of the revelation still resounded like thunder inside her. The park seemed to be on her mind, the wooden bench, the dark sky above their heads, the exact tone of Daniel's voice when he said Thomas's full name and dismantled all the defenses she still tried to maintain. She didn't know, it was true, but now that didn't matter anymore. Because the impact of the pain had been made. Daniel didn't scream, he didn't lose control, but his silence was the sentence. A silence that cut like a razor, dry, firm, definitive. Laura didn't know how to go on. She tried to maintain routines with her children, but the children's eyes no longer met hers with the same innocence. There was something there that was starting to break too. The trust, the access, the shelter. When Lucas asked to sleep for 2 days in a row at his grandmother's house, she understood that the crack wasn't just marital. It was cutting through the deepest bonds, and perhaps the most difficult to rebuild. Daniel, on the other hand, did not run away from the pain. He carried it with dignity, like someone who understands that certain scars are not something you choose, but rather something you honor. He started sleeping better. He woke up early, took long walks, and went back to visiting old friends. He didn't talk about Laura. When people asked him about the end of his marriage, he would answer with a simple and direct, "It's over," and no one dared to go any further. He went back to a coffee shop he liked, resumed old projects that he had abandoned, and reopened a book he had started years ago. Not out of revenge, not out of pride. But because he felt that, after so many years of serving the family's stability, it was time to look at himself. For the first time in a long time, he was alone with himself, and this, instead of scaring him, made him feel free. He even started going to a club with his children on the weekends, encouraging Lucas in basketball, teaching Isabella to swim. Moments with the children became his new base. And by the way they surrendered to his hugs, it was possible to see that the bond there was still intact. Laura tried to change the situation. She showed up twice at the coffee shop where he usually sat on Saturday mornings. The first time, he just nodded politely and continued reading his newspaper. The second time, she sat at the table next to him, ordered the same coffee as always, and waited for him to start a conversation. But he didn't. She mentioned her children, and he responded in short sentences. She said she had stopped talking to Thomas, who now understood everything. And Daniel just nodded, saying he hoped she was okay. The sentence seemed kind, but his gaze showed otherwise. He was no longer there. He no longer reacted. It no longer hurt. And that was the real end. Because the absence of resentment was, in his case, the symbol of overcoming. Laura left the coffee shop before finishing her coffee. For the first time, she felt the taste of rejection. Not of a body, not of an instant. But the exact feeling of no longer being needed by someone who had once meant everything to her. One afternoon, at a school meeting, the two met again. Daniel arrived with someone. A woman with brown hair tied in an elegant bun, a discreet smile, and a calm gaze. She spoke to him intimately, but without exaggeration. Laura saw them from afar. She froze. She had never seen him like this with anyone. It was different. There was a lightness in his gestures, a silent respect between the two that hurt her more than any explicit scene. As they approached, he greeted Laura with a calm smile. He introduced the woman as Mariana, a friend. Laura extended her hand, disguising the pain that grew like a hot iron in her chest. Mariana, in turn, was kind, cordial, and avoided staying too long. When they walked away, Laura stood there for a few seconds, pretending to look for a student's name on the list. But inside, something was falling apart. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. She knew, at that moment, that he was truly starting a new story. The night came with an even more suffocating silence than usual. Laura didn't eat dinner. She sat in the dark room, watching the street lights through the window. She tried to remember when she had lost herself. At what point did she stop fighting for what she had? At what point did she start thinking she deserved more, without realizing that she already had so much? She felt ashamed. And she missed him. Not just Daniel, who was her husband. But the one who was her friend, her partner, her shelter on difficult days. She wanted to call him, tell him everything that was stuck in her throat, but there was no space. He had moved on. And now, she was the one who had to face the absence she had created. 2 days later, Laura decided to go to her mother-in-law's house. She needed to see her children, she needed to feel that there was still some bond that she could hold on to. She was received with affection, but not with enthusiasm. Her mother-in-law, always polite, offered tea and asked how she was. But the warmth from before had disappeared. The children were playing in the yard. Laura approached slowly. She called for Isabella, who ran into her arms. But Lucas hesitated. He looked up, watched for a moment, and then turned his back, returning to the game. The scene tore Laura apart inside. She approached him, trying to start a conversation. He responded indifferently. When she asked if he wanted to go home that night, he said he preferred to stay there. That he liked to sleep there now. Laura nodded, holding back her tears. She left with a kiss on her daughter's forehead and her soul in pieces. She finally understood that her fall had dragged others along with it. And that the damage was not limited to the end of a marriage. The following week, Laura looked for Thomas. She sent him a message asking to talk. She needed to put an end to it, she needed to understand why he disappeared. Thomas replied hours later, arranging to meet at a discreet cafe. When she arrived, he was already there, with the same cold smile, his hands on the table, the look in his eyes that she could no longer decipher. She sat down without saying hello. She was direct. She wanted to know why he had disappeared, why he had not explained anything. He shrugged. He said he had not expected the situation to escalate to that extent. That he had not imagined she would expose everything. That he did not want to deal with drama. That she was incredible, but that she was going through a confusing time in her life. Laura interrupted him. She said she knew who he was, that Daniel had told her. Thomas smiled. He did not seem surprised. He simply said that the past was irrelevant, that she was exaggerating. Laura stood up. She grabbed her bag, said she never wanted to see him again, that she deeply regretted having let herself be deceived. She left the cafe without looking back, with the bitter certainty that, in her search for herself, she had lost everything that really mattered. Meanwhile, Daniel continued. Not in a hurry, but firmly. Mariana was not just a distraction. She was a woman who understood his time, his pain, his reconstruction. They saw each other often, walked together in the park, exchanged ideas about books, films, education. She did not demand anything. She was just there. And Daniel, for the first time, felt welcomed in a simple way, without suffocating expectations, without demands. He did not talk much about the past. Mariana respected that. But in his silences, he had said a lot. And she listened even to what he did not say. It was in this place of listening and calm that he was finding space to reinvent himself. Laura started to avoid the places she used to go with Daniel. She didn't want to risk seeing him, remembering him. But the city was too small for so many escapes. One day, in the supermarket, they crossed paths. She with her hair tied up in a hurry, her eyes tired. He with his children, smiling while Isabella asked to take him a candy. When Laura saw them, she froze in the aisle. Daniel saw her. He gave a discreet nod and walked on. There was no more resentment. But there was also nothing else. And that, in the end, was what hurt the most. Because the opposite of love is not hate. It's absence. That night, Laura wrote a letter. Not to Daniel. To her children. She told them about her mistakes, her choices, and how she stopped seeing what she had. She asked for forgiveness. I didn't expect them to understand right away. But I wanted them to understand that even adults get lost one day. And that even when they make mistakes, they love. She folded the paper carefully, put it in a box with some old photos, and left it at the back of the closet. That was all she could do now. Time would take care of the rest. Daniel, for his part, no longer kept letters. He kept plans. And for the first time, all the plans concerned only him and what would come next. Because, finally, he had freed himself not only from the weight of a betrayal, but also from the guilt for something that was never his fault. Now, it was time to start over. And he was ready. The night that followed their meeting at the supermarket marked a turning point for Laura. After that brief exchange of glances, after seeing her children smiling beside their father, she returned home with a feeling of complete absence. There was something in Daniel that had now definitively distanced herself from her, a kind of serenity that could no longer be touched by any apology or shared memory. The image of Isabella laughing as she pulled on her father's arm, the way he looked at her tenderly, as if he were whole in that simple moment, crushed her insides. It wasn't just the realization that she had lost her husband, it was the profound understanding that she had lost a home. For the first time, she felt like she was a visitor to her own life, as if the rooms in the house, the memories, the walls had become echoes of what she herself had dissolved. She started waking up earlier. Not because of obligations, but because her thoughts wouldn't let her sleep. She would stand in front of the bathroom mirror with a brush in her hands and stare at her reflection as if she hoped to find some answer there. She had stopped wearing makeup, not out of sadness, but because she no longer saw the point in decorating a version of herself that she no longer recognized. The days dragged on between one attempt and another to regain some kind of balance. I couldn't stay focused in class, the students noticed, the administration noticed. Her classmates started asking if she needed help, if she wanted to talk, but Laura avoided them. She no longer had the energy to pretend. When she returned home, she walked through the living room as if she were walking through an abandoned scene. The paintings on the walls seemed grayer, the furniture seemed to belong to someone else. And, in a way, they really did. This was the home of a woman who believed she had everything under control, who confused freedom with abandonment, who exchanged presence for illusion. Daniel, on the other hand, had already found a new rhythm for his routine. Now, when he got home from work, he would put his cell phone aside and sit down with Isabella to draw or help Lucas with a school project. He had started cooking new dishes, nothing fancy, but made with care. Mariana would come over some nights, discreetly, without invading the family's space. She understood the limits and respected their time. Their relationship grew with a mature calm, without rushing, without the need to prove anything to the world. Daniel knew that he still carried wounds, that there were still nights when he woke up with unwanted memories, but he also knew that these memories no longer controlled him. They were no longer anchors, but merely vestiges of a life that was left behind. The official separation took place in a few days. Laura signed the papers with trembling hands, in a cold room in the lawyer's office. Daniel was present, sitting on the opposite side of the table, with his posture straight, his gaze direct. They exchanged few words, only the essentials. When she asked if he held a grudge, he said no. He said the hurt had passed, but that there was a limit between forgiveness and coexistence. That there were things that could not be reconstructed. She simply nodded, with a slight movement of her head. She knew he was right. When she left the office, she stopped on the sidewalk for a few seconds, as if expecting something inside her to explode, but all she felt was a deep silence, a type of mourning that does not manifest itself in tears, but in an absence of senses. Living with her children became her biggest challenge. Lucas, increasingly withdrawn, gradually distanced himself. He wasn't aggressive, he just avoided talking. He responded with short sentences and kept his distance. Isabella was still affectionate, but she no longer asked to sleep with her on Sundays. Laura tried to stay strong, tried to recreate moments, invited her to watch old movies, prepared sweets from her childhood, but the children seemed more connected to the new structure of their father's house. Lighter, calmer. It was cruel, but it was real. Realizing that her children felt more comfortable with Daniel and Mariana than with her slowly eroded her. Mariana was kind, knew her place, never tried to take over as a mother, but that didn't stop Isabella from hugging her naturally or Lucas from smiling when she made discreet jokes during dinner. And that was exactly what began to eat away at Laura from the inside. Time didn't just move on, it changed. And while she was still trying to understand where everything went wrong, life was getting organized without her. Friends started to drift away, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. When someone else's pain lasts too long, it becomes a burden. And Laura noticed this in the invitations that no longer came, in the messages that became rare, in the automatic replies. She isolated herself. She started writing in an old notebook, every day, as a way of keeping her sanity. She wrote down memories, excerpts from books, questions that would never be answered. One day she wrote, "At what point do we stop being part of someone's life and become just a detail of the past?" He read the sentence over and over, with tears in his eyes, until he could no longer continue. One Sunday morning, when she was taking Isabella back to her father's house, she saw Daniel in the backyard, tending to the plants. Something so small, but it completely disarmed her. He was wearing the same old shirt he used to wear when he tended to the garden, the same calm way he observed the leaves, the same gestures with his hands dirty with dirt. She wanted to go through the gate, call out to him, tell him that there was still time. But she stood still, motionless, watching from afar. When Isabella ran to him and hugged him from behind, Daniel turned and saw Laura. He nodded, with a discreet smile, and went back to tending to the plant. Laura held back her tears, turned around, and left. It was at this point that the moral dilemma swallowed her whole. For months, she had tried to justify her own choice as a response to a void, an unmet need, a search for herself. But now, with time showing the true consequences, she could no longer hide behind these narratives. She realized that, sometimes, mistakes are not born of malice, but of omission, of negligence, of the vanity of thinking that we will always have another chance. But life, sometimes, does not give. Sometimes, one wrong choice is enough to change everything irreversibly. And that was what hurt the most, not being able to go back. That same night, Daniel sat on the porch with Mariana. They shared a glass of red wine and talked about simple things, as if they had known each other for many years. Mariana talked about her brother, about a trip she wanted to take, about a book she had finished. Daniel listened attentively. At one point, she took his hand without saying anything. He returned the gesture firmly. It was not unbridled passion, it was something deeper. It was as if they both understood the value of presence after knowing the weight of absence. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt peace. Meanwhile, Laura wrote in her notebook with a pen that was almost out of ink. Sometimes, it's not life that betrays us. It's we who betray the life we had. She closed the notebook, put it away in the drawer, and went to bed with the lights off. It took her a while to fall asleep, but when she did, it wasn't easy. She dreamed of her old house, of her little children, of Daniel laughing as he made pancakes. She woke up before dawn, her eyes burning. She got up, looked out the window, and realized that, even though everything was the same, she no longer belonged to that world. In the following days, she began to make small decisions. She reorganized the house, took down old photos from the walls, and donated clothes she no longer wore. It wasn't a new beginning, not yet, but it was an attempt to clear the wreckage. She visited a therapist for the first time, spoke little but cried a lot. She left the office exhausted, but with the feeling that there was still some kind of path, even if short, even if lonely. The dilemma now was different: how to continue living with dignity after losing everything. How not to turn regret into prison. How to become whole again, even if no one was watching anymore. Daniel continued his life with ease. Not because he forgot, but because he accepted it. The memories, the lessons learned, the mistakes and even the pain had become parts of a bigger story, and he was willing to honor it by living better. I was convinced that starting over was not about erasing, but choosing the next page. And there, with his children close by, with a woman who understood silence, he felt that, despite everything, he had won. Because surviving pain is a form of victory. And because, sometimes, it is in loss that we find the chance to be whole for the first time. On that rainy autumn afternoon, Laura sat in front of the window for hours, watching the gray sky transform into a mirror of what she felt inside. There was no longer any urgency in her days, just a slow emotional collapse that she tried to contain with long silences and automatic tasks. The routine had become a ritual of penance, a sequence of mechanical gestures where each movement seemed to carry the weight of the past. It was increasingly difficult to distinguish the days from each other, and everything that had previously had color was now an opaque spectrum of longing and guilt. When lightning began to cross the sky, she curled up on the couch, hugging her knees, as if she wanted to shrink her body until she disappeared completely. She remembered a time when storms were an excuse to make hot chocolate and watch movies with Daniel and the children under the blanket. Now, there was only silence. Silence and a regret that multiplied with each memory recovered. A few days later, Daniel was picking up Lucas from basketball practice when he noticed Laura across the street, standing in front of the school, holding a closed umbrella, even in the light drizzle that was falling. She didn't seem to notice the rain or the cars. She was lost in thought, as if trapped in another time. When their eyes met, she tried to smile, but Daniel looked away gently and turned to his son, who was approaching with his backpack slung over one shoulder. Lucas got into the car, excited, telling him about a play that almost resulted in a basket. Daniel listened attentively and responded enthusiastically. When they looked back across the street, Laura was already gone. As if she had never been there. And in a way, that was exactly what it was, she was no longer present anywhere. The following week, Mariana invited Daniel to a classical music concert at an old theater that he used to go to with Laura in the early years of their marriage. He accepted the invitation with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. He wanted to understand if it would still be possible to occupy spaces that had previously had meaning with new meanings. They sat in the third row, side by side, their shoulders touching discreetly. When the pianist began to play, Daniel closed his eyes. The music brought back memories, but, surprisingly, they didn't hurt as much as before. Mariana watched in silence, respecting his every silence. At the end of the performance, while the audience applauded, Daniel turned and looked at her as if, for the first time, he realized how beautiful she was. Not just physically, but in her presence. Mariana didn't ask too many questions, didn't demand answers, just offered space and calm. It was as if he had found someone who understood that scars are part of who we are, and that some of them will never disappear, but we are still worthy of starting over. That same night, Laura was walking through the city, alone, as if she were looking for answers on street corners. She passed by the theater by chance. When she saw people leaving, she approached, as if something was pulling her. She stood at a distance, watching the couples and the lively groups. When she saw Daniel leaving hand in hand with Mariana, the world seemed to stop for a moment. They didn't see her. They walked slowly, laughing at something that only they knew. The complicity between the two was evident. Laura felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't jealousy. It was something deeper. The pain of seeing happiness where she had destroyed her own. She stood there, motionless, watching the two disappear down the street, until all that was left was the echo of wet footsteps on the sidewalk. The meetings with her children became increasingly spaced out. Lucas avoided sleeping at her house, claiming he had exams, training, commitments. Isabella still came over, but she was restless, talking a lot about her father, about the new things he did, about the funny stories Mariana told. Laura listened to everything with a colorless smile, trying not to show the pain that was eating her up inside. One day, while she was making pancakes for her daughter, she heard her daughter ask her the question she feared the most, "Mommy, why can't you and Daddy be together anymore?" Everything stopped. The spatula fell to the floor. She sat down in front of her daughter, held her small hands and, with a choked voice, replied that sometimes adults make mistakes in a way that can't be fixed. Isabella just nodded, with the innocent wisdom of someone who doesn't yet understand the weight of words, but already feels the weight of absences. Daniel, at the same time, was beginning to feel something new, relief. Not because he was far from Laura, but because he finally felt free from carrying guilt that was never his. I was beginning to understand that often, within a relationship, love is sustained by only one side, while the other silently walks away. And that betrayal is not always just a physical act, but a sequence of negligence, of subtle separations that accumulate until there is no turning back. And even so, he had done what he could. He had fought. Now, it was time to let go. And that was what he did, little by little, without rushing, but without turning back. Mariana, in turn, did not demand definitions. She knew that Daniel was still going through an internal process, and she respected each phase. One day, during a conversation on the balcony, he mentioned the possibility of traveling with his children for the holidays. Mariana smiled and encouraged him. She said it would be great for the three of them. When he asked if she wouldn't mind staying, she simply replied that when you love someone, you have to know how to give them space to strengthen their roots. And that's what she did. She watered the ground with patience. Daniel held her hand firmly. In that touch there was a silent agreement. They were ready to live the new, with all the fears that the new brings, but also with the courage that comes from the truth. Laura, by that time, had stopped waiting for messages that would never come. She started going to therapy more regularly again. She started writing letters that she would never send. She wrote one to Daniel, one to her children, and even one to herself. She tried to use words to mend the pieces that were still resisting her. In a particularly intense session, the psychologist asked her what she wanted from now on. Laura was silent for minutes. Then she answered, "I want to forgive myself. Not for what I did, but for becoming someone who would do that." That sentence echoed inside her for days. It was the beginning of a new conversation, not with the world, but with herself. And it was this conversation that needed to be carried through to the end. One Saturday, while she was sorting through some old books, she found a yellow envelope with Isabella's scribbles on the cover. Inside, there was a drawing of the four of them together, her, Daniel, Lucas, and the little girl in the blue dress. At the bottom, in crooked letters, she could read, "Happy Family." That completely disarmed her. She cried right there, sitting on the floor, hugging the paper. She realized that, even though she had lost everything, there was still time to rebuild the bond with her children. Not the same as before, but a new one, with a different foundation, with a different honesty. The following Monday, she wrote a short message to Daniel, "Can I pick up the kids on Wednesday? I'd like to cook for them." He replied with a simple, "Sure." And that was enough. When Wednesday arrived, Laura prepared the house with care. She made Lucas' favorite dish, organized Isabella's toys, and put flowers on the table. She welcomed her children with a shy smile, without great expectations, just with truth. The evening went smoothly. They talked, laughed, and for the first time in a long time, Laura felt like she belonged. When Daniel arrived to pick them up, she greeted him at the door. For a moment, they were silent, then he said, "Thank you for today." The children were happy. She just nodded. She wanted to say so many things, but she said nothing. She knew that it was no longer the time for words. It was the time for action. And her actions, from that moment on, would speak for themselves. As he left, Lucas gave her a longer hug. He didn't say anything, but that was all. Isabella handed her a note with drawings and hearts. And Laura felt, deep down, that maybe, despite everything, she could still be a good mother. When he closed the door, he looked around. The house was silent, but for the first time, that silence wasn't despair. It was the sound of a possible reconstruction. Slow, difficult, but possible. And that was what sustained her now, the possibility of, even amidst the wreckage, finding some beauty in the pieces that remained. Because true love, even if broken, leaves traces that, if cared for honestly, can blossom in unexpected ways. And Laura was willing, even if late, to take care of those who were still left. Time passed without warning, without drama, without plea. It just passed. Slowly, like the tide that erases footprints from sand that was once trodden by bare feet. And with it, the seasons changed, the days adjusted, the silences took on new forms and the paths were rewritten with the naturalness of someone who has already understood that control is an illusion. Laura, who before saw herself as the victim of her own choices, now understood that every mistake, no matter how cruel, carries within it a devastating power, that of shaping what comes next. She had lost much more than her marriage. She had lost the mirror where she saw her most human, most complete, most protected version. But now, even without this reflected image, she was slowly learning to recognize who she was without the roles that had previously defined her. She was no longer the wife, she was no longer the woman admired by everyone, and with time she also stopped being just the one who had cheated. She was finally becoming someone in search of truth. She began giving voluntary talks at support centers for women in crisis, using her own story, without masks or excuses, as an example that wrong choices have a price, but also offer learning. Some women cried listening to her, others looked at her with judgment, but she remained steadfast, because now she had a clear mission, to prevent others from crossing the same abyss. One day, at the end of one of these conversations, a young woman approached her and said that she was about to cheat on her husband, who had already made plans, but that when she heard Laura, she decided against it. She said that she would call him that night and tell him about her anguish, because now she knew there was a more dignified way out. Laura hugged her silently. In that hug, she felt something in her redeem itself. Not for what she had done, but for what she could still do with the pain she had caused. Meanwhile, Daniel was packing his backpack for the trip with Mariana and the children. They would spend 10 days in the countryside, on a remote farm where the children could run free, without screens, without schedules, just nature and connections. Isabella prepared drawings to take with her, Lucas organized a notebook where he would write down his adventures. Daniel observed everything with a discreet smile, but full of meaning. This was what he had always wanted, a simple, honest life, with real connections, with presence. Mariana helped with the packing with ease, without wanting to control, only offering help when needed. During the trip, on a cold night under the starry sky, while the children slept and they shared a glass of wine on the porch, Daniel told her that he had left the papers of the past in a place where they no longer hurt. Mariana held his hand and said that love, when born from truth, does not need to compete with ghosts. He kissed her, certain that there, in that gesture, there was no more room for old memories. Only the present. A few months later, Laura received a letter in the mail. She recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. It was from Lucas. He said he was writing a school paper about mistakes and forgiveness, and that he had decided to use his story as an example. He said he now understood better that adults make mistakes too, and that the most important thing was when they had the courage to admit it, not to run away. He said he still missed the way things were before, but that he no longer felt angry. He asked her to keep fighting for herself, and that he would be there for her. Laura read the letter with hot tears in her eyes. At that moment, she understood that even the most torn bonds can, with time and truth, be remade in a different way. Never the same, but real. One late afternoon, as she was leaving one of the lectures she had started giving more frequently, Laura crossed paths with Daniel and Mariana in the parking lot of a cultural center. She had seen them before and thought about changing course, but something made her continue. She approached them firmly and greeted them. Daniel greeted them with respect in return. Mariana was cordial, with the serene kindness of someone who already knows where she belongs. For the first time, Laura did not feel pain. She felt gratitude. She told Daniel that she hoped he would be happy. He thanked her, and for a moment, the three of them looked at each other with silent, mature understanding. There were no winners or losers here. There were only survivors of a pain that had shaped new paths. And then came the time when everything calmed down. Where meetings were natural, phone calls with her children flowed without tension, where memories were no longer traps. Laura met a new man a few months later. Not someone to fill the voids, but someone with whom she could laugh without guilt, talk without masks. He knew her story, and yet, he chose to get to know her deeply. She, in turn, no longer tried to please, she just was. With him, she experienced again what she thought she had lost forever, lightness. One day, as they walked hand in hand through a street fair, she stopped and said, "I thought I didn't deserve this anymore." He looked her in the eyes and replied, "We all are, we just need to learn what we don't want to repeat." Laura smiled. For the first time, a full smile, without a shadow. Daniel and Mariana, on the other hand, grew stronger and stronger in their relationship. He proposed marriage in a simple way, with the children present, at a dinner at home. Mariana accepted in tears. Lucas and Isabella were thrilled. The ceremony was small, intimate, with few guests and many truths. Laura was not invited, and she understood. She was not offended. She simply accepted that there are places from which we are expelled by our own choices, and that dignity lies in not trying to invade that which no longer belongs to us. In the end, everyone found new destinations, but marked by scars that they would carry forever. Not as open wounds, but as marks that remind us of what we had to lose in order to finally find ourselves. Betrayal did destroy what once seemed perfect, but it also revealed everything that was hidden, everything that was sustained only by appearances. It showed that love without dialogue becomes fragile, and that constant absence kills much sooner than infidelity. And now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Which part struck you the most? Leave your opinion in the comments, we'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Remember, betrayal is not just an intimate mistake, it is a crack that spreads throughout everything around us. It corrodes homes, breaks bonds, destroys trust and empties everything that took years to build. We do not romanticize betrayal, nor do we defend justifications that hurt. Here, we make it clear, every choice has a consequence. Every action has an echo. And there is no victory when you choose to lie. Thank you for being with us this far. And always remember, love is a daily choice, and respect is what sustains everything. Until the next story.